Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into some seriously wild, deeply complex lore from our source material regarding the Zeta star reptilians. We are looking at a massive narrative here, one that spans millions of years, tracing the history of an extraterrestrial species from their arrival on prehistoric Earth all the way to their current role in a cosmic, spiritual hierarchy. According to the text in this book, Reptilians Strike Back I, this specific extraterrestrial group undergoes a completely dramatic transformation over the course of Earth's history. The text outlines a remarkable journey, shifting them from what are described as savage invaders and genetic colors, right up to becoming spiritual protectors of humanity. To really wrap our heads around this highly structured narrative, we're going to map out their journey chronologically across 5 distinct phases. We've got 1, the strongest Zeta aliens, 2, arrival and natural selection, 3, giant forms in early battles, 4, Mu Empire's defense minister, and finally, 5, transformation to guardian deities.
Okay, let's kick things off with Phase 1, the strongest Zeta aliens.
So, who exactly are we talking about here? Well, the source material defines the Zeta Star aliens as the absolute core, the mainstream faction of the reptilian forces. Originating from the Zeta Star within the Magellanic Clouds, they're presented as this overwhelmingly powerful group. In fact, the text notes they actually refer to themselves as emperors. These guys aren't some fringe group. In the lore of this book, they are the largest, most dominant extraterrestrial force to arrive on early Earth, carrying a highly aggressive, battle-hardened nature from all the intense competition on their home world. Moving right along to Phase 2, arrival and natural selection.
Now, the text frames their early purpose on Earth strictly around the concept of survival of the fittest. When they first touched down, they weren't just random conquerors. Actually, scratch that. They saw themselves more like cosmic gardeners, enforcing a brutal natural order. Their stated mission was to actively consume and eradicate what they deemed to be bad genes. By eliminating the weak, the evil, or the evolutionary dead ends, their ultimate goal was to preserve superior races, leaving only those with future potential. It's a pretty extreme form of genetic culling, completely driven by a predator's logic.
This brings us to Phase 3, giant forms and early battles. To pull off this kind of brutal culling, you need the physique for it, right? And the source vividly details them as monstrous giants dropping right into prehistoric combat. The text explains they were equipped with 3 eyes and 4 arms, and upon their initial arrival, they weren't just facing off against early humans. No, they were fighting massive prehistoric monsters. The book notes that many of their very first wave actually perished because they were going toe-to-toe with Earth's primary dinosaurs. It was a literal clash of titans for apex predator status. To put that into perspective, the text states, these beings initially stood an immense 20 meters tall. The source explicitly compares their original appearance to a colossal King Kong. However, the lore mentions that Earth's heavy gravity was ultimately just too much for forms of that size, forcing them over time to shrink down to a more manageable, though definitely still terrifying, 5 meters in height. The text notes their early days on Earth were intensely violent and honestly genuinely bizarre. Aside from warring with dinosaurs, the source material casually drops that they used Bigfoot-like creatures as pets. They even rode them for transportation. And staying completely on brand with their mission of genetic culling, they actively hunted and consumed early humans. If the human population was deemed bad or evolutionarily inferior by their standards, they were simply eaten. The Zeta Star aliens viewed this as necessary cosmic pruning. So following this timeline, you can really trace their physical and societal evolution. We start way back in the prehistoric era, where they are massive apex predators barely surviving against dinosaurs. Then we move into early humanity, where they act as towering predators culling human populations. But this third step is where the story shifts dramatically. As human societies advanced, so did the reptilians, and they eventually integrated themselves directly into the organized structures of ancient human civilizations.
Which leads us perfectly into Phase 4, Mu Empire's defense minister.
Instead of acting as rogue slaughterers, the text explains they became highly disciplined officials. In the legendary Mu Empire, their immense combat power was recognized and officially utilized. They were appointed as ministers of defense and outer guards. The source uses a really cool mandala metaphor to explain this setup. Highly intellectual beings were placed at the very center of society, while the fierce, combat-driven Zeta Star aliens were positioned on the absolute outer edges. Their new job? Harnessing that aggressive nature to repel foreign invaders and protect the Empire. they finally found a purpose that utilized their strength for defense rather than just pure destruction. And that leads us to our final stage, Phase 5, Transformation to Guardian Deities. The source material describes how these fierce, battle-hardened beings experienced a massive shift in loyalty. They were deeply moved by the ruler of the Mu Empire, Lamu. According to the text, Lamu possessed a unique, gentle authority. It wasn't the violent, domineering power the reptilians were so used to on their homestar. It was an authority completely steeped in compassion and wisdom. This encounter with a totally different kind of strength prompted a profound shift in their very souls. It was their first real step away from relying solely on physical dominance. And this creates such a striking contrast. The text details how they evolved from being these ruthless exterminators into Dharmapalas, or guardian deities. Having embraced the Elkantari faith, they no longer use their power to indiscriminately consume or conquer. Instead, the source claims they now dedicate their immense, towering strength solely to protecting the righteous and fighting off evil spiritual forces. Their entire existence has been repurposed by faith. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to consider the immense scope of this narrative presented in the text. From 20-meter-tall beings battling dinosaurs, all the way to becoming disciplined guardians of a spiritual faith, it is just a staggering arc. It leaves us with a fascinating question. How does the ultimate force of destruction become the ultimate force of spiritual protection? It's a remarkable look at how ancient lore can reframe raw power, suggesting that absolutely any force in the cosmos, no matter how terrifying, can be transformed by the right kind of authority. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the source material. Okay, let's just dive right in. Welcome everyone to today's explainer. Now, if you're the kind of person who loves unpacking highly unconventional texts and esoteric lore, well, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're opening up an investigative explainer on a truly fascinating and honestly deeply unorthodox mythological dossier. We're going to break down some concepts that completely reimagine ancient history, celestial beings, and the unseen forces supposedly guarding our planet. So, I want to start by throwing a pretty provocative question your way. What if Earth's ancient angels and winged myths were actually alien reptilians? Yeah, it's a jarring thought, isn't it? It completely challenges our traditional, historical views of angels as these soft-winged celestial messengers. Instead, it suggests something far more ancient, extraterrestrial, and, quite frankly, a whole lot more intimidating. Now, our source text for today's explainer is a book titled Reptilians Strike Back I. Specifically, we're going to do a deep dive into the esoteric claims presented in Chapter 2 of this text. And just a quick reminder, our goal here isn't to prove or disprove anything, but just to clearly and objectively unpack the incredibly detailed universe that this book builds. Let's open our first dossier file. Section 1. The True Identity of the Guardian Altarians. According to the text, the beings from the Altair star system, who are actually often referred to in Japanese mythology as hikoboshi, well, they aren't just formless spirits. They're described as literal pterosaur-type reptilian beings. And the absolutely crucial point here is that they possess physical bodies capable of actual flight. So unlike your traditional gray aliens who need UFOs to zip across the sky, these Altarians are physically winged creatures. So, you might be wondering, how long have they supposedly been here? Well, the dossier asserts they arrived a staggering 150 million years ago. From there, the text traces their influence through ancient times, noting a very specific presence within the ancient Inca Empire, all the way to the modern day, where they're said to operate as spiritual defenders. Talk about a massive span of influence. Moving right along to Section 2, the origins of Tengu and Garuda. The core thesis of the book presents a really stark contrast. On one side, we have our classic human understanding of these myths, right? Divine birds in India like Garuda, mountainous bird demons in Japan, celestial messengers in the West. But the dossier's shocking claim is that literally all of these archetypes actually trace back to one single source, pterosaur-type alien reptilians from Altair. The text essentially argues that humanity has just been misinterpreting alien biology as divine mythology. And this brings us to a highly specific detail in the text. The author asserts that when Western angels, who we typically picture with large, sweeping wings, come to Japan, they manifest in the spiritual realm as the legendary Tengu. So the large wings and bird-like features of the Tengu aren't just fantasy, according to this lore, but a direct interpretation of these winged reptilian extraterrestrials by the local Japanese culture. It's kind of wild to think about. Okay, Section 3, the Seven Archangels' Tactical Combat Style. So the text claims these Altarians are actually counted among the famous seven archangels, but their motives are highly unorthodox. According to the dossier, they are fiercely dedicated to protecting humanity. Specifically, they act as guardians for what the text calls the Venusian lineage humanity, which they view as inherently weaker and in desperate need of defense from hostile invading forces. They are essentially our cosmic bodyguards. But get this, they aren't using traditional weapons. They rely on sheer spiritual and telekinetic power. They use a technique described as telekinetic binding to literally paralyze enemies in midair. They can also drop localized lightning strikes to shock and shoot down hostile targets, acting as a sort of anti-air defense mechanism. The text describes hostile aliens invading Earth's airspace, only to be completely caught off guard and shot down by these invisible telekinetic strikes. That brings us to Section 4, a shocking past, carnivorous culture. Now, the text does not shy away from the brutal reality of their past. When discussing their history of capturing and executing hostile human-eating aliens, and occasionally humans themselves, the entity being channeled casually admits to a carnivorous past, stating human flesh might be tastier than pork. Yeah, you heard that right. They compare their historical role to the Shinzengumi, the famous Japanese special police force of the late shogunate period, noting that just as the Shinzengumi acted as police who had to kill, these angels used lethal force and consumption as a means of policing the planet. Angels with a carnivorous past. Let that unorthodox concept settle with you for just a second. It completely subverts the idea of the pure pacifist celestial being, painting a picture of gritty, predatory warriors who really did whatever it took to maintain order on a prehistoric Earth.
Finally, let's open Section 5, Modern-Day Mission, Air Force Generals. While they supposedly no longer engage in those ancient carnivorous practices, the text claims they are very much still active today. They often take the form of dragon gods protecting Buddhism, and they serve as self-proclaimed Air Force generals guarding the religious organization. They basically see themselves as the defensive umbrella, providing aerial and spiritual overwatch against negative forces.
So as we close out today's explainer, I want to leave you with this question. If the esoteric claims in this dossier hold even a fraction of truth, what invisible air force of ancient winged reptilians is hovering above us right now, silently guarding the skies? It's definitely a fascinating framework to view our world and our myths through, right? Thank you so much for learning with me today, for keeping an open mind, and for joining me on this deep dive into the Altair dossier. Until next time, stay curious.
Welcome to the Explainer. You know, have you ever actually stopped to wonder why completely separated ancient cultures all around the world share these remarkably similar legends about intelligent water deities? It's kind of a mind-bending question. Well, today we're unpacking a fascinating source text that claims these global myths don't just share some common psychological archetype. No, the author suggests they actually share a single extraterrestrial origin. It's an incredible premise that bridges ancient Mesopotamia, Japanese folklore, and the deep cosmos. Let's jump right in. Okay, so let's start by contrasting two seemingly completely unrelated ancient legends. On one side of the world, we have the Japanese kappa. If you're into folklore, you probably know them as those legendary amphibious water sprites that hang out in rivers and streams. And then, way over on the other side, we have the ancient Mesopotamian Ones, a literal fishman deity who supposedly rose from the sea to teach civilization to early humans. Geographically and culturally, these two myths are, well, worlds apart. But, according to the author's readings in our source text, both of these amphibious myths aren't just fairy tales. They actually stem from the exact same extraterrestrial visitors who arrived on Earth millennia ago. So, the unifying answer to this massive global mystery lies with the being you're looking at right now. The text introduces them as the Pisces reptilian. According to the author's spiritual readings, this specific extraterrestrial species traveled to Earth all the way from the constellation Pisces. This is the literal physical origin of our global mythological mystery. The text makes a really compelling argument. Whenever ancient humans encountered these beings emerging from the water, they obviously lacked the vocabulary for advanced space travel, right? So they just recorded them in the only way they could, as fish gods or water demons. Now, here is where we absolutely need to throw out our Hollywood stereotypes. Unlike those hyper-violent, predatory reptilian tropes we constantly see in modern sci-fi, this specific faction is remarkably different. They have a surprisingly mild-mannered personality, and rather than hunting humans, they're actually pescatarians. Their main food source is just fish. They even have this highly developed aesthetic sensibility, really favoring beautiful scenic landscapes. But, don't let the mild manners fool you. They still love a good power struggle. The text actually notes that they specifically enjoy physical contests that look a whole lot like modern sumo wrestling. They frequently use tactics to literally drag their opponents into the water. So, we're basically talking about art-loving, pescatarian, sumo wrestling aliens, which is just amazing.
To really understand how they sparked this global mythology, we kind of have to look at their origins. The Pisces reptilians are an amphibious race. They originally built these vast, highly advanced underwater cities on their home planet, which makes sense, was a world heavily dominated by water. Because they're amphibious, they can definitely survive on land for periods of time, but they primarily live and operate in aquatic environments. It's this unique biological and technological adaptation to water that allowed them to just seamlessly inhabit Earth's oceans and lakes. And that is exactly what sparked the global fish people mythology we see scattered all across the historical record.
And their biology and their technology is arguably the most fascinating part of this whole reading. You might be wondering, how do they generate the immense physical power required for things like, say, their sumo wrestling? Well, the text explains that they possess advanced technology worn right on their bodies that acts as a localized energy converter. It actually works a lot like how we're currently trying to develop modern hydrogen-powered cars. The device intakes regular everyday water, utilizes an internal mechanism to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, and then burns that extracted hydrogen as a highly combustible, powerful fuel source. To put that into perspective, this incredible hydrogen energy adaptation gives them roughly 10 times the physical strength of a normal human.
But wait, think about the mechanical vulnerability here. If their power relies entirely on a piece of technology that requires a constant intake of liquid water to generate fuel, what happens to that immense strength if they lose access to the water? Or what if the device itself gets compromised? Keep this fatal flaw in mind, because it perfectly, and I mean perfectly, explains one of the most famous, specific details in all of Japanese folklore.
If you know anything about the Japanese kappa, you know the cardinal rule. A kappa always has a small dish of water on top of its head. The legend goes that if you bow to a kappa, it'll politely bow back, the water spills out, and boom, it instantly loses all of its magical strength. According to the reading, this isn't just some quirky fairy tale. It's actually a misunderstood, primitive, historical record of this exact extraterrestrial technological device breaking down. Ancient people literally witnessed these amphibious aliens losing their mechanical power when their water intake devices were damaged or emptied, and they just passed the story down as the legend of the kappa's dish. It's like a giant puzzle clicking into place, reinterpreting mythology entirely through a technological lens.
So, zooming out to the timeline of ancient history, we can see how this local folklore builds into something epic. The text states that these Pisces reptilians arrived on Earth roughly 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. They emerged from the seas and navigated up the rivers. Eventually, they made their way to ancient Babylon, rising right out of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. There, they were revered as the deity O-Annis, and they actually taught early humanity essential skills, things like astronomy, mathematics, and the very foundations of civilization. But, as you might guess, their peaceful intervention didn't last forever. During the era of the Great Flood, they found themselves locked in this massive cosmic clash with rival alien factions over the actual fate of human existence.
The source material describes a fierce ideological struggle with a rival extraterrestrial group known as the Enlil faction. Now, the Enlil faction was highly aggressive. They viewed these mild, amphibious beings as evil beasts purely because of their reptilian appearance. Disgusted by humanity and our Pisces benefactors, the Enlil faction famously decided to trigger a great flood to wipe out human civilization entirely. As quoted in the text, they actually mocked the Pisces reptilians' aquatic nature, declaring, "If you like the sea so much, live in it. We will cause a flood."
But when the Enlil faction initiated this cataclysmic flood, our mild Pisces reptilians did not just stand by. Operating under the name of the Sumerian deity Enki, these amphibious beings acted as messengers and protectors. They actively rebelled against the destruction. They reached out to a specific prophet who had maintained faith, warned him of the impending disaster, and provided the exact means to survive. The author asserts that this intervention is the true historical event that we now universally recognize as the story of Noah's Ark.
To bring this whole story back to the present day, the author posits that these beings never truly left our planet. After the flood and the dawn of modern human history, they simply retreated.
Today, they are said to maintain highly advanced underwater bases in our deep oceans and lakes. On top of that, they've transitioned to holding a really profound spiritual influence. They allegedly reign over astral realms, like the mythical Dragon Palace or Ryugujo in the Japanese spirit world. Basically, they've shifted from being our physical teachers to our quiet, hidden observers and spiritual guardians.
We've covered a ton of ground in this explainer today, tracing a path all the way from the rivers of ancient Japan and Babylon straight to the constellation of Pisces. It completely reframes how we look at history, doesn't it? Which leaves us with one powerful question. If these specific readings hold truth, how many of our oldest fairy tales are actually misunderstood records of advanced extraterrestrial contact? I highly encourage you to look at the myths of our ancestors not just as bedtime stories, but as potential historical blueprints just waiting to be decoded. Thanks so much for joining me, and definitely keep questioning those invisible bridges between ancient mythology, the deep oceans, and the stars.